Welcome to the SwineTime podcast. I am your host, Spencer Wayne. I'm one of the practicing veterinarians here at Pipestone, and I'm also one of the partners within Pipestone Holdings, and I have the great pleasure of interviewing interesting people to talk about interesting things in the SwineTime podcast. Today I have an old friend of mine who has gone and done great things in life, is not a Pipestone employee or directly associated with Pipestone, but is somebody we rely on regularly for his good work at the Diagnostic Lab at Iowa State. Our guest today is Dr. Darin Madson. Darin Madson is one of the pathologists or the diagnosticians there at the D Lab. He's a guy with a wealth of background in production and understands pigs and pig production very well. He shared with us some things that are going on at the lab there a few months ago within our own group, just to update us, but I thought the listeners would really enjoy hearing from him directly on our podcast. So Darin, I'll turn it over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background in production and how you got to where you are right now to this point in your life?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Darin Madson, as Spencer said, I grew up in southern Minnesota near Albert Lea, just south of there, actually. Grew up on a crop and diversified livestock farm and raised bottle calves, actually, growing up. But my best friend had pig production, and I got to do their chores, and they paid me much more than my dad ever paid me. So hence I had this kind of passion that pigs were gonna make me some money someday. And with that, my other background of livestock, I decided I wanted to head to veterinary school. So that was kind of a goal of mine. Ended up going to the University of Minnesota on the St. Paul campus, and that's actually kind of how Spencer and I kind of come together. I was in a fraternity and farmhouse fraternity. Great place.
Yeah.
So a lot of great memories.
I remember, Darin, I think I met you when you were a freshman, and I remember thinking, who's this kid? And little did I know you would be the master that you've become on all things diagnostic.
I worked with kind of some practitioners in the veterinary field, particularly swine, one being Tom Wetzel. He took me under his wing. I did an internship with him for a couple summers and got to work production down in near Wells, Minnesota for a couple summers prior to vet school, which was a great experience, kind of adding to that base of knowledge of what the swine industry is and watching it evolve in the early 2000s, actually in the late 90s, dating myself. When I got into vet school, I kind of took to the swine and then the faculty there with Bob Morrison and Scott D and Hansu Ju, and kind of focused my efforts on getting as much swine production medicine education as I possibly could. And in that same time, I worked in the diagnostic lab there in Minnesota at the end of the day. So for almost 4 years during vet school, I would go to class, and then after class, I'd head to the D lab, and that kind of sparked my interest to become a diagnostic pathologist in the swine world. And I knew that after graduation, I kind of needed to get more experience, I thought. So opportunity to work for Christensen Farms and had a great experience and met my lifelong friends there for the veterinarians, and one's now practicing in Pipestone, which is Dr. Joel Narum. Dr. Hans Rotto and Dr. Tim Niffen were the other ones, and we still have a lot of fun together. But those are the mentors that kind of helped me in my production world and being the experience of just being post-graduation of vet school. You know, being on the floor, the necropsy floor of Minnesota, you could kind of see how everything kind of came together at the end. You know, the practitioner would submit tissues, the diagnostician would sit there and order tests and think through it, and then lo and behold, a report comes out and they can find what was causing the issue, whether it was PERS, whether it was PCV2, or name your disease, right? And so that intrigued me quite a bit, as being able to kind of pull those pieces from different clinical pictures and different tests and kind of wrap it up and say, hey, I think this is the issue. That was kind of my, passion, I guess, to try to help producers in that sense, because that was where I was thinking that I could make a difference. So in 2006, I went to Iowa State and had the opportunity to do a pathology residency and a PhD. At that time, if everybody recalls, PCV2 was a big issue. And so it was a really great time to be in the swine industry, not necessarily for production, but for research, So I got to do my advanced degree in with PCD2. So that's kind of where I kind of got my feet wet in the diagnostic world. And
all right, Darin. As time goes on, you build your skill set and your reputation, and you definitely follow that path. So thank you for sharing that. It was really good. And for the listeners out there that might be farmers, if your veterinarian comes out and submits tissues, Darin is the go-to guy. There's other really good pathologists and folks at the diagnostic lab, but Darin he'll understand the production background of what's going on in the barn, and also look at the histopathology and say, you've got this kind of microscopic damage, and here's how I would interpret these results. So he's kind of a total package. I'm really glad he's at the lab right now. So moving on, Darin, can you talk a little bit about just some of the highlights and high points of what is going on at Iowa State now at the diagnostic lab? Things that you say, well, these are cool new technologies, something we're doing that's unique.
So the biggest thing is obviously a new diagnostic lab that we are going to move into in it's fully operational in first week of February of 2024. So it's exciting. I actually get to move into my new office next week. And so this new lab is state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar investment, and it's going in 2 phases. So the first phase is complete, and that's what we'll move into. But that's kind of the necropsy floor, the administration, the sample processing, and then some bacteria and histology. And now we're actually raising funds to do a second or phase 2 of a building, which is basically a doubling down of the building where the other laboratories or pieces of the lab could fit in too. So like the PCR labs, the bacteriology labs, the toxicology lab, and move that into a second phase. And so bids will go out for that here in the next, I think sometime this spring. But in essence, Iowa State will have the newest and greatest diagnostic lab in the United States. And I just can't thank it enough how great it is. But that's kind of the big news, right? And we're just trying to get in there and use that space to the best of our ability to help producers and veterinarians in the field. Yep.
Darin, is this expansion is like doubling or more your footprint physically there? It's a big jump. Is it to handle more of the same type of volume? Are there a bunch of new technologies, or is it a mix of both? Or the expansion that's happening, is it purely to accommodate throughput, or is it new stuff?
It's actually the existing stuff, but it's different areas. So in the lab, we kind of break it down to different sections. We have the histology section, which is the microscope sides. We have bacteriology, which we culture things. We have the PCR labs, which is molecular. We have the toxicology, which is analytical chemistry. All of those different sections are not going to fit in this new part. The new part that was currently built is actually a necropsy floor, sample processing. And until that second phase is built, we will actually have to take some samples back to the old lab to actually get run until we get the new funding. And then those other sections will move over. And so we will all be in one building. Now, the old building is still going to be functional until we obviously get that done. And we're just out of space. We're just about 150 employees within the lab trying to get all these samples running in a timely manner so everybody can make decisions.
Darin, this is a dumb question, and it's slightly off topic, but so you've got this huge expansion. Tax money goes into state coffers, funds through special bonding or whatever it is that goes into the construction of this lab at Iowa State. But when a producer sends a case in and then they pay for it later and say, oh, wow, this is a lot of money or whatever. Let's say it's a few $100 for a case. How much of that is covered by state support? Obviously, we just talked about the lab being built through state support, but is some of it subsidized? This is off topic. I'm just curious because the producer sometimes says, man, I paid a lot of money in diagnostics. Is there quite a bit of that gets subsidized by the state at the same time?
Actually, it's not subsidized from a case perspective, which is different than some other labs. So a case submission for running the test is a fully functional as its own business. And to be honest with you, the molecular lab is the number one kind of a money generating thing for Iowa State University. There's that much throughput that goes through and that gets generated. Now, I don't know 100% this because I don't know the details, but the salaries are different versus what actually the lab overhead is and how expenses get paid out and parsed out. So there's some nuances there, but for the most part, it's not subsidized.
Okay, I was thinking that the cases would be far more expensive if we charge the true cost, but I didn't know. So all right, so it is truly the cost of doing it when you pay that bill. Okay.
Yep.
All right, interesting stuff. Any specific cool new technologies that you think is worth commenting on?
Yes, actually, there's a lot of things going on here. I wanted to touch on a few. So detection of pathogens, right? That's kind of what we want to figure out what we got. It's going to PCR based, a lot of different techniques there. PCR is where you actually look for the pathogen itself, and you're looking for the DNA or the RNA of that particular virus or bacteria. And in the last few years, we got something called next generation sequencing, which is a method that you could take any sample. It doesn't matter if it's feces or if it's saliva, whatever it is, and we could kind of put it into a process where we put it into a PCR machine, and we can find any or all potential targets, viruses, bacteria that's in that sample. Prior to, if you recall, we actually have to select kind of what sample's there, right? Like we have to say, okay, I want to test for PRRS or I want to test for influenza. The next generation sequence is kind of in the reverse. It says, okay, tell me what's there. So it's kind of like this big roundabout way to determine if there's new pathogens or if there's something causing a specific disease entity that we haven't seen before. So there's a lot of that going on. It's really neat finding a lot of different things in the veterinary world, whether they mean something. I think that's yet to be determined on a lot of these, because we can find different viruses that are unheard of or different bacteria in different locations they're not supposed to be. But actually kind of adding that all together is determining whether that's significant or not, and the interpretation of that finding is really the key. So there's a lot of that going on. People want to understand what's in their herds, what's not in their herds. Is this bacteria different? So we have a lot of that going on within the industry.
Oh, just to camp out on that for a second, the producers listening be like, "Oh, this sounds pretty cool." And where we've applied it already, it's interesting because you'll think, "Oh, I'm looking for one virus." And you do next gen sequencing. Oh, you actually got 150 organisms that show up, and you think, oh, well, which ones are important? Because if they can't all be causing problems, and no, maybe a couple, but it opens up so many more questions, and it illustrates the importance of knowing what you're looking for and is it important or not. Because you can test for something, you might find it. You can test us. We might find something. It doesn't mean it's causing us problems necessarily. And the next gen thing kind of explodes that view where you see everything all of a sudden. You think, oh, there's a lot going on here, not just one virus or one bacteria.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And to add to that, Spencer, you actually could have multiple different viruses of the same one. So, for instance, PRRS, right? Hot topic. This way, or this testing of next generation sequencing can say, okay, I actually have two different PRRS viruses, and that may make sense with what's kind of occurring in my herd, or why my strategy for mitigation wasn't working as well. Or maybe there's three, or maybe there's 4 or 5 different circoviruses in the sample. It's a way to actually find a virus, but it's also a way to find variations potentially of that same virus. And so that's kind of the utility of it. When we do a lot of sequencing or whole genome sequencing, we use this method to determine if there's differences. Basically, we were trying to get smarter, and you're right, Spencer. Sometimes we don't know what it means, but it's a finding, and we have to use that to correlate with what's occurring. So it's going to be some time. It's going to be a long process, but hopefully we get smarter as we do this with time.
Oh yeah, I bet we get a lot smarter here as we get a body of data to start assessing. Hey, what's the cost of doing that? If you said do a next gen sequencing effort on this, what is it?
Yep. So you can break it down a little bit, and I'm going to look online as I'm talking to you, but there's different portions. You can do bacterial, you can do virus, you can just do RNA virus, you can do DNA virus. But it's a little bit different. And then the one where you want to do just kind of the novel detection, like I have a sample of lung, and you tell me what's in there, that's $400. But basically, we can take feces and we can say, okay, what's in there, and it could be, you could have PED, you could have Rota, you could have Sapo, you could have E. coli, you could have all these different things in there, and it's going to spit that out too. It's not going to spit out, I have one thing. It could spit out that you have 10 or 20 different potential pathogens in that sample. So that's $400. But like, there's a lower thing for sequencing. It's $200 and $300 gets you a whole genome sequence of like a PRRS virus. So
okay,
that's what the
and, really relative value. It's more than another simpler set of diagnostic requests, but not a lot more. That's a tremendous value, actually.
Yep.
Okay, we got time for one more cool thing going on before we probably have to wrap this. Anything else technologically that's worth commenting on that's new, cool, or maybe unique to Iowa State?
Well, I think there's a lot of cool tests going on. We've got a lot of new things for visualizing. RNA scope is one of them. That's another technique to try to amplify kind of small amounts of DNA or RNA in a sample. It's kind of like the old IHC. It's really cool. But I think for a short time, what's really neat is actually a couple new pathogens that I wanted to touch base on that we're trying to figure out what's going on. It's kind of in the industry right now. And one being neonatal diarrhea, kind of in the farrowing house, kind of Sapo virus is kind of new or hot topic. It's not a new virus. It's been around for almost 40 years or been detected, but now it's kind of gaining traction and we're finding a lot more and people are testing for a lot more and potentially making kind of different mitigation steps. So that's kind of a hot topic. A lot of people testing for it.
Does that relate to this RNA scope? You're talking about are totally separate.
Yep, we can do it on the RNA scope and find it. Helps us understand the significance of it, because obviously I think for your audience, and this is kind of a pet peeve for mine, or a soapbox topic, but just because you detect something doesn't necessarily mean that it's the cause or any correlation with what's actually occurring in your particular set of pigs, whether that's respiratory disease or enteric, who knows, but basically detection does not equal correlation or causation.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the terms that we use. And so just purely finding something doesn't necessarily mean it's the issue until you add, secondary or ancillary pieces of information that kind of corroborate the issue. And so that one of those right now, I think, is Sapo virus. We're finding a lot of people are associating with diarrhea, so it probably does have its role. But we're using that RNA scope, and we're also using whole genome sequencing because it's an RNA virus. When we do sequence out of NGS, you get multiple different isolates in that same sample that we talked about. So, just because you detect Sapo virus doesn't mean there's one Sapo virus in that sample. You could have 3 or 4 different Sapo viruses that are actually kind of associated with the clinical diarrhea in piglets.
Darin, what's the difference between an RNA scope and just doing a simple PCR test?
So our RNA scope is actually done on tissue, and you're actually visualizing the DNA or RNA within that set of tissue. So if you have a lesion, so for instance, I have atrophic enteritis, which is a viral response when the fingers of the intestine shrink. And if I have that lesion and I put a RNA scope on it, I can see that the Sapo virus is causing that atrophy, that shrinkage of those intestinal villi. That's the benefit, right? You can actually place the antigen or the DNA into the lesion.
So it's kind of like IHC. You can see the lesion.
Exactly like
IHC.
Okay. Exactly like IHC.
So for example, for Sapo, because this comes up a lot, I got Sapo. Well, is it a problem? So you could actually say, yes, I can see the virus there. I can also see the damage, and I can see them together. That's the magic of it. Okay.
So it has a stronger correlation with significance, meaning if I have a lesion and I find that pathogen in that lesion, we can put a correlation together that said, hey, this lesion looks like it's caused by this. And so it's stronger than just detection, which is NGS is, right? You're just detecting something in a sample, and we have no idea if there's a lesion associated with that or not, but we can tell the amount that's there.
Darren, if we send a case in and we say check for sapovirus, I think they just do the PCR test. Do we have to specifically request this RNA-scope testing?
Yes, you would.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
If I say diagnostician's discretion, you won't. I've been requested if I want it.
Yeah, and the problem with that is sometimes you got to be really careful what you're looking for. The RNA scope technology is fairly new and it's still kind of expensive. Just like everything else when it comes out, right? It's kind of expensive and then it goes down with time, and that's where RNA scope is right now. You can kind of get to it at different avenues and understand the significance, but if you really want to know, you need to run that test, and it'll come down, but it's pretty expensive right now.
Okay. Hey, do you have anything you would say advice for producers or any trends from 2023 diagnostically you think that are continuing? Anything, if it's nothing, it's fine. If it's something you think it's worth sharing, perfect.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, everybody. I know it's been a little bit tough here the last 18 months, and it's going to be for a little bit longer, but hang in there. Do our best to help you guys make decisions and move forward when it comes to kind of diagnostics. And I hate to say this right now, but it's that time of the year, and we've picked up a lot of PRRS virus here in the last month, and it's starting to sneak around quite a bit, and a lot of farms breaking here more recently. So I hate to end it on a sad note, but beware, I guess.
Is that uptick you're seeing, is that beyond what is seasonally expected? That's because I get the same question from producers saying
it's higher.
It's higher.
It's higher this year than in previous years past. There's a great epidemiologic group here at Iowa State, and they've been trending that, and we're above a standard deviation of historical. So it's starting to go here this winter. And then also on that same tech comment, I don't know if it's virus specific or it's the changing of the viruses as with time, but we are noticing that the viral load that we're finding in the samples is a lot higher, meaning the CT values for the PCRs are lower. So there's certainly a lot more virus present in the sample, and that may be helping spread the virus, whether that's lateral on vehicles, on people. Just kind of keeps in mind that we got to have really good biosecurity as we go through these cold months, because viruses like to hang out and survive better in these cold environments. So just kind of refocus on that biosecurity as we move forward here in this time.
Yeah, that's good information to share. You're always trying to ferret out, is PRRS worse this year than it was the previous years? And it sounds like potentially yes, for a couple of reasons.
I would say that's true. Yep.
Okay. Hey, Darin, probably should wrap it up here. Thank you very much, old friend, for coming on and talking to us. We really enjoyed it the other day when you spoke to our group of veterinarians, and our listeners, I think, would probably gain some good information from what you just shared. So thank you, Darin. Everybody out there, thank you for tuning in, and invite you to tune in next time for whoever our next guest is at the SwineTime podcast here at Pipestone. SwineTime podcast was created for the pork industry and individual pork producers around the country. Hosted by me, Dr. Spencer Wayne, with the Pipestone Veterinary Services. The podcast contains pork industry news, advancements in animal care, and how to enhance your productivity. Monthly podcasts are available on Spotify, Google Music, iTunes, Anchor, and on www.pipestone.com.